Welcome to episode 3 of the Filmmaking Through Music podcast. I am your host, John Wader, and my mission is to help filmmakers like yourself achieve a more commercially appealing film through the effective use of music and scores. Whether you are a director, producer, screenwriter, videographer, editor, I want to help you have a better approach and process to having more emotionally driven, narratively aligned music for your projects. I'm very excited for this episode. We are talking through the 8 most common misconceptions about composers and film scores that I think a lot of filmmakers either bought into or falsely believe. And I think getting past some of these misconceptions is going to be one of those key things that helps you get to a more compelling film score and an appealing film overall, so that you can have a better process with your composer, with your music supervisor. I trust that even getting through 1 or 2 of these is really going to help you kind of get to that next level as a collaborator on your films with music itself. I think some filmmakers may still believe these misconceptions due to working with, like, I'll say non-specialists, like general music producers or general musicians, or just friends, or having editors just grab random music. So maybe on earlier films in your career, when you didn't have a composer, you were kind of using a substitute. You were using something to try to make do. And so maybe you kind of learn some things through that process that doesn't actually align to what it's like to work with a film composer. A film composer is a filmmaker through music. That's a kind of part of the branding of this entire podcast, the Filmmaking Through Music podcast. That in itself, storytelling and filmmaking through music, is a specialist skill in telling visual stories through custom music. I always make the analogy of it's no different than any other role. You hire actors to act, and you DPs to DP, and gaffers to gaff. We all have our specialized roles, but for some reason, sometimes when it comes to the music, people grab non-specialists. You're always going to grab a trusted DP you're always going to grab the right person for the right role for everything else in pre-production and in production. So why not do that with the music itself? So I always like to introduce these with, like, what's the goal? What's the identity? And it all goes back to, you want that standout film. You want better likelihood of getting into festivals. You want to be viewed by the audience and your peers. You made a legitimate, professional-looking film, and I think the goal is, and of course, having some sort of independent distribution or larger distribution if that's on the table as well. The benefits of kind of getting over these misconceptions. I want you to change your mindset and thinking about film music just like your favorite director does. These misconceptions are, I think, if you're looking at the next level of directors and filmmakers, they've certainly gotten past these misconceptions. All right, let's get into number 1. The first misconception about film scores and film composers is that film composers can easily create exactly what's in the director's mind. All right, let's just think about that for a second. Composers can easily create exactly what's in the director's mind. That is misconception number 1. So why is that a misconception? Yes, film composers are expected to be able to create different types of music, and they're expected to be able to know and have intuition of what to do for a film. That is something that I bring to every project. I always say my professional opinion. It is absolutely a challenge in that every project you're gonna have to learn what's going on in a director's or a filmmaker's mind and head. What are their goals? So in order to best serve a film musically, the composer needs to learn what's going on in the director's head, the director's mind, what they're thinking about. So a director may assume that composers can just translate abstract ideas into music without much communication, and they can, but those are what I would consider like a good bonus, right? That's a positive signal and a bonus, and something that you build up over time by working with the same composer. Again, you develop a shorthand almost. That is really something that comes out with, like, longer term relationships. And if I am going to be required to compose music that is exactly in your mind, I want to be almost overly communicated to from you as a director. Send me your playlist, send me your inspiration music, send me the film scores that you were listening to when you were working on this project. So misconception number 1, composers can easily create what's in the director's head. How to get over that? Communication. Overly communicate your needs and what you're looking for, and focus on emotion, goal, vision, and mood. All right, misconception number 2, very much going hand in hand with misconception number 1. Misconception number 2 is composers do not need detailed direction, or composers should not need detailed direction. Again, this goes into a lot of the communication pieces. And so when a director says, make it sound epic, or make it sound more intense, or make it sound sad but not too sad, we're all going to have different interpretations of what that means. Something sad but not too sad to me is different from what is sad but not too sad to you. So you have to get aligned on where you are in terms of like that scale of 1 to 10. My scale of 1 to 10 might actually be a 10 for me might be an 8 for you. But let's focus again, if you go back to episodes probably 1 and 2, focus on emotion, vision, and goal. So it's not just, hey, I made a suspense thriller, write the music for it. Because I'm going to have a different interpretation of what suspense and thriller is. And you might say, oh, that classic suspense thriller type music, but that might be a different type of music to me versus you. So get aligned on some of that more descriptive language. And it really ends up with communication and collaboration to making sure that music can be aligned. Again, a lot of overlap with number 1, but again, how to overcome this misconception is again, provide that detailed direction of what you are looking for. Now, the big asterisk there and the caveat is I'm very big on directors and filmmakers do not need to be well-versed in musical language because it's the composer's job to interpret narrative filmmaking storytelling language into music and then have that conveyed back to the director. And then if it works, it works. And if it doesn't, then you keep revising. But the detailed direction, again, really goes back to communicating the story and the overall goals for that project itself. You should not run into a scenario on a film where the composer is sending you things for feedback and you say, this is absolutely not what I expected in a negative way. Like, hey, like this is not what we talked about. Because if you're aligned on that direction, then every feedback round should just be a little too much this, a little too much that, a little more here, a little less there. All right, misconception number 3 about film scores and film composers. Composers play a small role and just provide background music. Some directors might underestimate the narrative role of music in film, and they might view it as background noise and not a crucial storytelling element. Now, that could be true, and that could be sufficient for many different types of films or different styles of videography and filmmaking. But when you recognize music's ability to shape the narrative of a film and also the audience's reaction and perception of the film, the public's perception of that film, that is where you sort of unlock that next level of filmmaking. Like, okay, this is why it's done this way. There's a reason that every big budget film has a budget and a score to reflect that. Because a film composer is a core part of your filmmaking team. Producer, director, writer, DP, editor, composer. Those are probably the first names you see in the credits, with the exception of obviously having some big named actor. And there's a reason why that happens, because the level of attention and time and effort and ability to control the film comes highest from those roles. You'll hear me say on this podcast that films are told 4 times. First, when you write, I learned this from someone who was quoting someone, so it's not my original idea, but films are told 4 times. Once when you write it, once when you film it, once when you edit it, and once when you do music and sound. And so those are really, really crucial and critical parts to the storytelling team and the story itself. So it's a very large role on a feature film project. All right, misconception number 4 on film scores and film composers is that composers should work quickly. Now, this is a misconception, even though we often do work quickly and on short timelines. So, endless stories about film composers coming in at the last minute to write a film score, and it does happen often because it is primarily a post-production process. But we see the industry we see that the industry has been trending for years and years now of getting composers involved much earlier, so that they can write music based off the script, so that the director can feed some of that score to the actors to get them inspired. You see a lot of composers now writing like more diegetic music in addition to score, but generally composers are often asked to work on short timelines and very quickly. And we do, because we've adapted and we've learned how to build systems and be efficient with our writing. And I tell a lot of composers that is the job. You are expected to write music very quickly, but you shouldn't have to, right? So I always encourage directors that I work with to bring me on as early as possible, because it just really helps with a lot of relationship development and overcoming a lot of these earlier misconceptions as well. But in film, it's I guess there's an irony of long hours, short timelines. So we're always trying to do more in less time. And maybe this is something that applies to more than just film scores and film composers. But that's why I always walk directors through the whole end-to-end process, which I went over in episode 2, and which I kind of go into in detail in my film scoring playbook for directors, which you can get through the link near this episode. But setting up expectations of here's how much time this will actually take to have the best film score possible is very important to me. Misconception number 5 on film composers and film scores is that the film score is a one-person job, aka the composer. And I hope that this misconception has less weight than other ones, because it's a team. We all know how much of a team effort filmmaking is. And so while again, one might assume that, hey, you hire a composer, they're doing everything, composers are often working with a larger team to help support them. And you see this obviously most commonly in the big budget films. But when you're looking at a composer and you're setting up that project, understand that the composer is effectively the head of original music. Because if their job is to write the score for it, to write the original music for it, again, instrumentally, not necessarily songs, but if they're a department head, so to speak, you can assume that they're working with others themselves. And I bring this up because obviously it's a budget conversation. And I just want to list out really quickly some of those other roles that might be pulled into your film score. And it's something that you might want to think about budgeting, or at least asking your composer how they might want to budget for those, or if they need them. So you have your composer, of course, but your composer may have an assistant composer to be writing what's called additional music. So oftentimes you see additional music by in the credits. So that's going to kind of be like a secondary composer, a backup composer, or a composer working with them to just apply some themes that say I've written, and they can apply it to different scenes. As you prepare for live recording, if you're so able to for a project, that's when you start bringing in a lot of additional roles, such as an orchestrator or people to do music preparation, copyist work, arranging work. And that's really taking, say, the composer's initial composition and making sure that sheet music is prepared and everything's fleshed out. And then, of course, you're gonna have people working at the recording studio, mixers, conductors, live musicians itself. Those roles are kind of the most common underneath a film composer in their department. And then two roles you see on most films: music supervisor and music editor. Now, a lot of times they might be kind of pulled in separately for a project, but again, when you're looking at the collaborative part of film composing, that relationship between a composer and a music editor is very important, because the music editor is what's going to allow the composer to focus on composing and let the music editor focus on making sure that original music is fitting in perfectly when little tiny picture edits come in. So let the editor focus on picture edits, let the composer focus on original music, and let the music editor be that intermediary to make sure that, hey, John's cue was approved, but we actually changed the scene there. The music editor can go in there with the files that I would export and make sure it fits, rather than that coming all the way back to the composer for like a rewrite. All right, we're getting into the big three here. So in my opinion, probably the biggest three for last, or the things that I really want folks to take away from this episode. So misconception number 6 on film composers and film scores is that composers should mimic other film scores. And so I bring this up mainly to have that conversation about temp music and what we call temp love. But in any creative art form, we're always making something that is inspired by something else. When I write film music, when I'm writing music in general, I'm writing something that's ultimately or inherently is inspiring me from everything I've ever heard that I've liked, and now I'm putting it out in my own way. And the same thing goes for dialogue and acting and filmmaking. And we use temporary music in film to give us an idea of okay, this is just could be one step closer towards the end. We don't have music ready yet, but let's just see what it could be like. So you help get an idea of that. And the challenge is that when that gets thrown in too early and your composer is not involved, filmmakers generate what is called temp love, where you see your scenes so many times with that temporary piece of music, and then you continue to edit that scene and refine that scene to that piece of music, and it feels so good and it looks so good because you spent all this time refining every exact beat and every exact cut to this perfect piece of film music that was written for a massive Hollywood budget by a massive Hollywood composer, and now you've applied it to your film. So instantly it's going to look good, look better, and sound better because you're applying this amazing piece of music to it. But the longer you leave that in there, you develop that temp love, very similar to what musicians and artists and bands experience called demoitis. Right? You write a song, you record a demo of it, you listen to it all the time, you love it, then you go to a professional recording studio to actually get it down, and you think you like the demo more, and that's just because you've been hearing it 1,000 times more than you heard the version that you recorded in the studio. And so the way to get around this with temp love is, one, change that mindset of it is temporary, I'm just using this as reference, I understand this is for a different movie, and also understand that the earlier you can get your own music in there from your composer, you can actually achieve that same result of, oh my gosh, it's so perfect, it's so aligned, and it's with our own music because you get that composer involved early and that music editor involved as well. So that's a really, really great way to help that score contribute to the narrative and the edit as well. And the other piece there, again, because this misconception was about, mimicking, composers should mimic music, misconception, copyright issues. So that is always something that I'm copyright issues, always something that's on my mind when I'm getting temp music and I have to write something very close to temp music. It's just not something that you want to have to deal with. You just don't want to have to deal with copyright issues with your music. It's not something that you want to take on as a filmmaker and producer, because we'll get into an episode about rights of the film music, but when you hire a film composer, you become the owner of the publishing for that music, or your production company does, because you need the publishing rights in order to put that in your film. All right, my last two misconceptions on film scores and film composers. One, misconception number 7. Composers are a nice-to-have luxury on a film. They are not. A film composer is a must-have, in the same way that any other of your key filmmaking team members are. That's, if you're making a film, you're making a feature film, you're trying to put yourself in this industry as a narrative filmmaker, festivals, distribution, awards, whatever you want. You can't cut the corners anywhere. You'll find ways to, of course, with budget, but some directors view hiring a composer as a nice-to-have expense, and what I've learned is that do what you can to make it work, because any amount of original music is better than no original music. Because again, going back to the licensed library, anybody can grab that. Free, cheap, quick, convenient, commoditizes the film. So maybe for a quick proof of concept, maybe for a really short film, but then again, for a really short film, you can get a composer at a much affordable rate. It's less music. Your total runtime is much shorter. That kind of brings everything down. We know that total runtime is that's what's driving your budget up to begin with. But composers are a must-have on a film project. And again, going back to what the identity we want to achieve as of overcoming these misconceptions, it is that of you want to be a filmmaker with a standout film in festivals, viewed as legitimate and professional by audiences and peers alike, viewed as legitimate and professional by the audience and your peers alike, and ideally have some sort of distribution. I think you know that you'd find a better chance of that in having that composer on your team. And lastly, misconception number 8, theme of this podcast for sure, is that composers do not need to understand film language. They do. I think I've already even said it earlier in this podcast. I'll have to go back and look. But it's a composer's job to interpret storytelling, filmmaking, narrative language and terms. I interpret that. I put it through the music machine. I give you the music, and it works. It's not just, hey, composer, write some music. The more I learn about pacing, editing, narrative structures, colorists, the more I learn about what you care about as filmmakers for a project, the more I can learn about that and take that in and I ask myself, what does that mean to me? What does that mean for the film score? The better film score I can write. All right, thank you for listening thus far. I'm gonna recap these for you in a quick list because I know it's a lot and my Fitbit is going off because I hit my step goal today. Okay, misconception number 1. Composers can easily create exactly what's in the director's head. Wrong. Communicate. Number 2, composers shouldn't need detailed direction. Again, similar to number 1, it's really about the communicate, emotion, goals, vision, mood. Misconception number 3, composers only play a small role and just provide background music. They are a core part of your filmmaking team, and they can drive the narrative and the audience's reaction. Misconception number 4, composers should work quickly. While this is a misconception, we often do this. So again, hire early, and composers set up those timelines. Make sure you understand the level of efforts that are going into that. Check out episode 2 of this podcast for more on that composing timeline. Misconception number 5, the film score is a one-person job. Again, remember that the film composer is that head of music department, head of original music department. Some projects, yes, it's going to be a one-person job when the budget doesn't call for it. But really, remember when you get into live recording, you're really hiring a good amount of extra help to bring that film score to life. Misconception number 6, and this is the first one of the big 3, composers should mimic other scores. Again, avoid that temp love. avoid copyright issues. Again, another one where bringing your composer on early is really going to help you overcome this misconception. Misconception number 7, probably my favorite one. Composers are a nice to have luxury on a film. They are a must have on a film. And misconception number 8, composers do not need to understand film language. Please do so if you are a film composer, and if you are if you are a film director, please. I think we're going to get into an episode about what to consider when you're hiring a composer. And so, I think one of the parts of that one is film directors. When you're hiring a composer, make sure you're hiring someone that understands film as well, or is able to get there. So again, thank you so much for listening. If you're looking for more on sort of my end-to-end approach on film music and film scoring, I have a free film scoring guide for directors that you can grab through the link in the show notes and around this video. And I'd be happy to chat with you one-on-one as well, do a free scoring consultation for you. Thank you so much for listening. Happy filmmaking.